All religions are constituted of similar aspects: a belief or a teaching, ethics or morals, some kind of sacred writings or spoken traditions, and among many other things, customs, symbols, celebrations. Different religions come with different views of God and the world, and most importantly, a man's place in the world. This determines what's ethical or not, what are man's values, how he should behave, and how he views other people. From what kind of a God or gods a man believes in, and also from how is that God or gods related to the world he lives in, depends the role of a man, his behavior in this world, and his expectations from his God or gods. There are many religions with very diverse formulations of how they see God or gods. We can say that most religions see their gods, the world, and humans as a one whole. Gods and humans are parts of one world. They are not the same, but they belong to the same existence. In contrast to that, we have so-called monotheistic religions, ones that believe in one God. These are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. What all three have in common is that they, each in their own way, rely on the same book, the Old Testament, or more specifically, on the Book of Moses. The most important part of the first book of Moses, that these three monotheistic religions all accept, is the act of creation, where we read about how God is creating the world and humans in it. There are many consequences that arise from the notion of this world being created by God, as written in the book of Moses. First is that God is creating this world by saying the word, "Let there be." It implies that created world doesn't come from the essence of God, that it's not a part of Him in any way. The world is an act of God's will. This means that the world didn't have to be created. God didn't have some kind of an urge to create the world, which He couldn't resist. God wasn't enforced into creation of the world, neither by something inside of Him or something outside of Him. It was an act of free will. That's why we say that the very existence of this world and all of us was optional. It might have not happened. Simply said, we owe to God the fact that we exist. Next, an act of creation means that this world and everything in it, including a man, is not eternal, since it has a beginning. From the phrase, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep," later was formulated the phrase of creation ex nihilo, which means out of nothing. It's just something that both the description used and logical necessity imply. The words without form, void, and darkness are just a way to describe nothingness, since there is no accurate way to describe non-existence. The created world and everything in it received its being from God, and that means it doesn't have its being in itself. Its being was created out of nothing, and so it naturally tends to go back to nothing, to the state of non-existence. In other words, the world and everything in it is mortal. It has a beginning, and since it's mortal, it has an end too. So the most important conclusion from all of this is that there's an existential gap between a God and the created world. God is completely transcendent to all creation. He is unreachable in every sense, most importantly, existentially unreachable. Looking at it from human perspective, it means that no moral purity, no mental clarity or spiritual heights can reach this God. Only God can overcome that gap and reach out to a man, which He does, but only in Christian view of the world, where He becomes a man, Jesus Christ, and in Him unites God with His creation. But not in Judaism and Islam. There, God just remains transcendent forever, and the existential gap between God and the world is never crossed. As we mentioned earlier, as a contrast to this type of relation between God and man, all other religions view God or gods and the world as different parts of the same existence. A word that would best describe this kind of view is pantheism, from Greek word pan, which means all, everything. So it's a view that all is God, or God is all. He is inside of everything in this world, in a man, in body and spirit, in animals and plants, earth and sky, wind and fire, even life and death. And it doesn't really matter if there are many gods that permeate everything and are designated to each particular phenomenon in this world, or it's just one God that's in everything. The point is that they are all part of the same level of existence. And this brings us to the main problem every religion known to mankind is trying to solve, and that is the problem of death. And all religions are solving it in accordance to their view of the world, to their view of the whole of existence. And since most religions view a god or gods, the world and the man, as a part of the same existence, the consequence is that death is also viewed as a part of that existence. It's viewed as a natural thing, like a circle of life, or a transformation of some kind, like from one aspect of existence into another, or a circulation of energy, for example. There are solutions of this kind as many as there are religions, but they all have one major oversight. None of them preserves the uniqueness of a particular man, as he was while he was alive. Here we are referring to a man with his body and soul, with all of his parts, just as he was while he was alive. All these so-called solutions to the problem of death have in common that they all view a man after his death as something more or less different than he was when he was alive. Religious solutions to death usually focus on the invisible part of man, like his soul or spirit, and proclaim it as eternal. And that is consistent with the overall view of both the God and the world as eternal, since they are all of the same level of existence. But the visible part of man, that is his body, is viewed as expendable, non-important, sometimes even as a bad thing, which we're lucky to get rid of. So we have a solution to death as a spirit-body type dualism. Then we also have, for example, reincarnation, in which someone, when he dies, becomes someone else or something else. We also have ideas like transforming into some kind of energy that's a part of nature or the world, which is basically the same. There are some religions that aren't giving a solution, but simply acknowledging that those who died are now in some kind of place prepared for the dead, like the underworld ruled by Hades in Greek mythology. And there's nothing nice about that place, it's pretty gloomy. We can say that these solutions to the problem of death are all a sort of escapism. They completely ignore what human being is, as we know it from our human experience, and instead propose that humans are really something else, something that they will be when they die, and that our actual human experience is not what we really are. In a way, our current existence is basically a partial lie, and it will reach what it's supposed to be when we die. In contrast to all this, we will go back to the Book of Moses, where God, while creating this world and everything in it, also says, God saw it was good. So here we have a totally different view from other religions, that the world is created good as it is, and consequently humans are also created good as they are. So in opposition to other religious views, in Christianity humans were created and viewed by God as good, such as they are now, such as we experience ourselves in our totality, but with the caveat that through sin, death becomes actualized in this world. So we see that the act of creation as portrayed in the Book of Moses doesn't see death as God's plan for this world. This world and everything in it were created good, and should be as they are. Death is something that creeps into the world against God's plan. It's a man's mistake, a sin, a man's doing which occurred in opposition to God's will. But although this happened through Christ's work, the act of creation gets its fullness when a Son of God becomes a man called Jesus. He dies on the cross and rises from the grave 3 days later and shows himself as immortal. Jesus came from the dead with a physical body that was exactly like it was at the moment of his death, still having wounds that kill him. Except he wasn't dead now, he was immortal. And this fits perfectly with the act of creation. Both the act of creation and Christ's resurrection show the death as a problem, not as something intended. The way a man was created in his totality, body and soul, was the intended way, was good, as God said. The death is the intruder here, a problem that needs a solution. And we also see the solution in Christ's work. It's the resurrection of the body. In other words, resurrection of a whole man, not just his invisible part, his soul, spirit, or however else it's called in other religions. By reinstating the human body, God is reinstating a man as a whole. The other thing, maybe even more important, that Christian solution to death preserves, is the distinctiveness of each individual human being, of each particular person. By reinstating a man exactly as he was, deprived only from his mortality, the Christian view of the world keeps the uniqueness of each person. Due to received immortality through Christ's act of resurrection, a man will forever be exactly who he was in his earthly life, exactly who he was in life as we know it. To now again contrast this to other religions, we can go back to, for example, reincarnation, where one person becomes another person, or a thing, which is in fact death. Death of your uniqueness, death of you as a person, death of your experiences and memories, of everything that makes you, you. If you are not you anymore, by becoming someone else, you cease to exist, which what death really is, the end of your existence. Whatever carries on in any type of afterlife, if you are not you, you're effectively dead. Not much use of some energy you're made of that is continuing in some form if you are not you anymore. So we see that by reinstating the body through resurrection, Christian faith is also reinstating the man as a whole, and most importantly, preserving the uniqueness of each individual person. You will remain you with everything that makes you who you are, and you will be immortal. And that's what immortality really is, an unchangeable state of who you are forever and ever. As opposed to this, other religions, in order to solve the problem of death, inevitably have to introduce some kind of existential change in the very being of man. To conclude, we could say that in Christianity, with Christ's resurrection, death is removed from the existence to keep the uniqueness and wholeness of a man intact. And in other religions, because of the inability to remove death from the existence, death itself remains intact, and the uniqueness and wholeness of a man is removed.